Hey, I'm Grant Babbitt.
And I'm Steven Farnsworth.
And you're listening to It's a Dad Thing podcast. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of It's a Dad Thing podcast. Steven, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Hey, so yeah, man, how's your week been? I know it's a crazy week with NCAA tournament, right? That's been going on. How you been doing? Have you been watching the games?
I've been following it. I've been trying to get my kids involved. I watched a women's game yesterday. The two freshman phenoms. I mean, I'm all in it. I'm ready to go. What about yourself?
I got the kids involved. We've all made a bracket at home, so that's been fun. My daughter picked Oral Roberts to go all the way to the Final Four, so I'm super stoked that she could. So the way we do it, right? We do like a single point for the higher number picks, and then 2 points for upsets, right? So she's got so many upset points. She is in the lead right now. It's very exciting. But yeah, you know, I'm sad about my Jayhawks as always, but it's tournament time.
I mean, that was a little brutal. And my son picked the Drexel Dragons to go all the way because we went off. I showed them school stuff, you know, for each first round. And each time Drexel was brought up, he was like, that's the Dragons, right? And I was like, yeah. He's like, they win, of course. So he was really sad that first or second day when they didn't quite make it, but
that's okay. My second to youngest picked Eastern Washington, and you know everybody in my family picked KU to go, and they're like, "Oh, that's the Jayhawks, right? Yeah, I'm gonna pick them." And he was like, "Eastern Washington," and I said, "Wait, you want the Jayhawks, right?" And he's like, "Nope, I want Eastern Washington." Ooh. And so he took Eastern Washington all the way to win the championship. I was like, bold move,
of course.
Very fun, but I will say, I hated telling him that Eastern Washington lost. Just I was like, I'm sorry that your team lost.
you revel,
one of those things, like as a dad,
bit.
like, I'm so sorry. Next time, don't pick them. Right? That's kind of how it was.
Listen to your dad next time.
Not really. No, but it's fun. And if any of you are listening and you know you don't know about our bracket, we've got a little bracket going on right now too. So that's a lot of fun on the what was it? The college? I can never remember the name of it.
NCAA official one.
March Madness. Yeah, it's NCAA official one. It's not the ESPN tournament. But anyway, awesome. Fun stuff. I'm glad you're having a good week. I'm having a good week. Steven, we've got a guest here today. You want to introduce him?
Yeah, this is actually my brother-in-law, Craig, which we got to hang out last weekend, I believe, and got to do some family stuff over in Oceanside. But Craig, welcome to the podcast. And for those who don't know you, give them a little intro.
Yeah, so my name's Craig Pell. Like Steven said, I'm his brother-in-law. Happy to be the brother-in-law. Married for the last almost 12 years to my wife Val Ann. We have 3 children. We have Charles, who is 6, almost 7. He's Mr. Independent. People call him the kid with the hair, because he's got this really nice. He's got the California look. He fit in there. Really
does. Well. Yeah,
nice.
He totally would fit on the beach on a surfboard for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So so he's 6. Hardy is 5. He's my middle child. Probably the happiest kid you'll ever meet. But he's built like a fullback. I'm trying to get him into sports. I mean, he's got this. I don't know. It's crazy. And then we waited a couple years and we had a girl. Her name is Bailey. She's 2. She is stereotypically the youngest, stereotypically the girl. She's also kind of overconfident right now in that 2-year-old stage. So
sure.
Yeah. So
does she have you wrapped around her finger already?
I actually, yeah. I'm just gonna. If my kids ever listen to this in the future, whatever. I told her whenever she was born, I looked at my wife. I was like, whichever one of them was the favorite, they're not anymore.
Oh no! All right. Well, luckily we only have a few people listen to this show, so I doubt your kids will ever be able to find it in the future. Yeah, you'll be fine. Oh yeah, that's good. That's so funny. That I feel, I don't feel the same way. But I have the 4 kids, and I have 3 boys and 1 girl. And I've heard this. I don't know if this is actually true. Have you guys ever heard this? That dads, supposedly there is something genetically inside of us that we are more patient with daughters than we are sons. Like there's something that is like predisposition that we go, okay, yeah, I can put up with your crap a little bit longer than I can put up with his crap. And
I find that to be both, like, for Sarah as well. Sarah is way more patient with the boys. And I'm like, what are you doing? They don't get away with that. And then she's like, what about Peyton? And I'm like,
it's
we're
funny
not
how
talking
that
about
works.
that right now.
Yeah.
I know that
same thing.
I share my food and drink with my daughter more than I ever have with my boys. They grew up knowing Dad doesn't share food. It's kind of like Joey from Friends, right? Joey
yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But Bailey, she gets food. She's okay.
Yeah. Well, Craig, I appreciate you coming on today. So where are you talking to us from today?
I'm talking to you from Houston, Texas. We've lived here for almost the past 3 years.
Okay.
Before that, we were up in Northeast Oklahoma for 7 or 8 years, something like that.
So what caused the move down to Texas? So you like the barbecue down there? I mean, what brought you to Texas?
No, it was work. So I'm in IT with oil and gas, and like every other oil and gas company, we've got headquarters here in Houston. And so I don't know if I wore out my welcome in Oklahoma or if I overstayed I don't know. Anyway, they moved me down to Houston, which has proved very beneficial. My wife and I are big city people. I came from Baltimore. She came from Detroit, and then we met in Nashville, and then we moved to a town in Oklahoma with 30,000 people. And so we're happy to be back in the big city.
Yeah. No, I love Houston. I've been down there a few times to work on different shows here or there, and I love Houston. I mean, I wish I could actually say that I've tried the food, but I've worked on food shows that revolve around Houston. So I've seen all sorts of delicious stuff, but since I have a bunch of food allergies, so I can't actually eat all the delicious stuff that I've been filming. But yeah, Houston is great. I'm a big fan of Houston. I got to ask you though, before we get into our topic, are you a big sports fan?
I'm a medium sports fan.
Okay.
So I used to be a big sports fan. I was actually telling Steven last week, March Madness is about the only sports event that I kind of live and breathe by. The rest of it's kind of, if I can catch a game here or there or whatever ESPN tells me, so I can have decent conversations at work the next day.
Right.
That kind of thing. So, I used to kind of revolve around college football and that kind of stuff. I do have my OU house shoes on right now, just
okay,
because I know you and Steven and OU and KU. So there's mine. Yeah, those OU house shoes.
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, it's fine. It's all right. You don't have to show them on this show. It's fine.
In my defense, I did pick KU to be in the Final Four. So
you should have done that. Yeah. That's what stopped him. Thanks, Craig.
No, and OU did win as many tournament games as Kansas. I mean, I don't want to get too much into it, but just
I'm glad that
field.
Look, I'll give you guys some props. I'm so glad that OU beat Mizzou. I'm fine with that. I'm good. Right? Because my team is Kansas and anybody who plays against Mizzou. Right. So I was going to ask you about Houston and the state of Houston sports. I mean, obviously, if you've been there for a few years and maybe it's not your home base necessarily, but yeah, Houston sports, I don't know if you're following it at all, but it's been a rough few years. Probably the entire time you've been there, they've gone through some quite interesting, I would say, ups and downs, but mostly downs for Houston sports. It's been pretty interesting as of late, I guess. So
we had one up that turned into a down. Our World Series, it turned into a down.
That's true.
Yeah, I do follow Houston sports pretty close. And we'll go to a couple games here and there because they're fun. But yeah, Harden leaving and all the stuff with the Astros and that kind of stuff is quite. But you got University of Houston in that March Madness still.
I'm excited. I'm rooting for you. I got a buddy who went to the University of Houston, and so I root for them. His other team is Ohio State, and so not so well there. But I'm glad he's got Houston still in there, so that's good. That's good. And by the time we're listening to this, I couldn't tell you if they're still in it or not. But
yeah, I'm also glad that they're the Texas team that's in it, as opposed to the Longhorns.
Texas. Well, yep, and they just lost Shaka Smart.
I know.
Shaka Smart went on to go to Marquette. Yeah. It was strange. He hasn't won a tournament. I feel like
there was you're either going to resign or we're going to fire you. And he was like, oh my God, look, there's another opening up north.
That's what I feel.
Because there was no announcement. It was just all of a sudden he switched teams. It was just weird.
Yep. Yep.
Well, Craig,
Well,
I wanted to have you on because one of the big things that happened actually earlier this year, one of the big news stories was the crazy snowstorm that like ripped through Texas, and just kind of like, I mean, it was just weird. I remember being on the group text and checking in with you guys and seeing how the updates and stuff was going on. And I was like, I almost like pulled up Google Maps again. I was like, it's Houston, Texas, right? Like, why are they like, I grew up in Oklahoma. That's where I'm from. And like, what is happening down there and why, And so like, it was just such a crazy natural like disaster, like crazy thing that just happened. So I just kind of wanted to bring you on and talk a little bit about what it's like to be in one of those natural disasters, and as a dad, kind of that thought process that you go through, the kind of before, during, and after. Because like, what are when that forecast was coming, because I think there was like a week or so that I remember it being in the news of like, hey, there's going to be a huge storm coming through, and all the weathermen are like predicting all these different things. Were you thinking at all about it? Was it even on your radar? Like what was kind of going through your head?
Oh, absolutely not. So when it came through, my wife was so excited because we've lived here for 2 or 3 years, and there's no snow. It's kind of our climate's very tropical, so in February when that happened, it's typically 50, 60 degrees,
Hmm.
and we're outside barbecuing. But yeah, so she told me, hey, there's a chance of snow. Like we're gonna get snow. Not a chance. Like no, we're not. Like so then we'd get a little closer, and she'd be like, oh, they're moving up the percentage. No, no, it's not. It's Houston. It's not gonna snow. Because the weather here is always hit or miss, right? And you
mm,
guys are in
Hmm.
tropical as well, right?
Yeah.
So, they'll tell us there's a 5% chance of rain and then you'll get a downpour, or they'll tell us there's a
Hmm.
hurricane coming and we'll all prepare and nothing will happen, right? It'll
Yeah.
shift or it'll whatever, it'll dissipate or whatever.
Hmm.
But yeah, so it said there's an Arctic blast, you're going to get hammered with snow. No, we're not. Like that was my whole thing. No, we're
yeah.
not.
Right.
I
Well,
hear
because it's
when I
hard
used to
sometimes.
when I
Go
used to
ahead,
live in
Grant.
Kansas, it was inevitably it was like when they say, "Hey, there's going to be a huge snowstorm," you're like, "Yeah, okay," because there wasn't generally when they say there was going to be a big snowstorm, then it was like a light dusting or nothing. You're like, "Oh, great, that wasn't too bad." But then when we're like, "There's a little bit of sprinkles, there's maybe a little bit of snow," and then all of a sudden, boom, school's closed for 2 days because there's snow everywhere and there's ice and you can't. And I'm like, that's what I'm used to from Kansas. I mean, so I understand that whole saying it's going to be a big thing coming and then going, it's probably not. The warning signs are
Yeah.
there,
Hmm.
but what proof do we
And
have,
even
right? I
earlier in
haven't
the
experienced it.
year, I think it was earlier in the year, or it was late last year. They called for snow. And I said, no, no, it's not. It's not going to snow. And sure enough, the snow came as close as like College Station,
Hmm.
which is a little bit northwest of Houston. Um, but yeah, we didn't get anything. It stayed 60 degrees, whatever. So yeah, it was. I was. I guess I would say I was fully unprepared for it from a mental standpoint, just because
Mm.
it's Houston. It doesn't snow.
So, well, so you're unprepared for it, but I mean, hearing that, do you guys have any kind of like, I don't know, you're saying right now there's no snow ever, you've never experienced. Do you have anything that is like, do you have salt? Do you have snow tires? Do you have any of that kind of stuff
Do you have a
around? Like
shovel, like
even
a
just like
big
like
snow
an
shovel? Yeah.
yeah, like an ice scraper, a snow shovel. Do you have any of that stuff to be prepared for this?
None of that. No.
Okay.
No, and in fact, I kept saying, if the city of Houston had a single salt truck, this whole thing would be very different. But they don't have a
Mm,
salt truck or a
Mm.
snow plow or anything in the whole city. Millions of
yeah.
people, not one salt truck.
Yeah, I
And
feel
same
like
with
in
us,
Tulsa
right?
they had one. I don't know if I feel like I remember reading a story whenever I was like in college that Tulsa, the city of Tulsa, had like one truck.
Hmm,
And I was like, how is that possible?
yeah. Even if we just had one, yeah, the big thing was the freezing, and then we just couldn't get it off the road because we didn't have a
Mm.
truck. But yeah, I don't have salt. I have a shovel in the Jeep. I have a Jeep with big tires, but I don't really have snow tires. Um, but yeah,
So then
no, we
like
have
what
none of that.
happened once the snow so then the snowstorm starts hitting, right? Because then it was probably a few days, and I'm trying to remember back like of some major snow, and it's like, okay, this thing seems to be like somewhat of what they're predicting, and it starts hitting. What happened then? Like for you guys, did you guys hunker down? Did you guys start making plans? Like what was that process like?
Yeah, so like you said, they started talking about it the week before, and then it came in on Sunday night. Well, by Friday, my work had already closed the office for Monday. Um, and so we knew that I was going to be home Monday, and that's when it was kind of like, if work's going to close, maybe it actually might hit. And then the temperature dropped and temperature dropped, and it finally came through Sunday night. I think it stopped snowing on Thursday. I think Thursday was our first
Mm.
nice sunny day. Um, and yeah, so it was kind of nuts. Sunday night there was this really light dusting, like the trampoline outside in the backyard was, ice, and the kids went and, of course, jumped on it with ice.
Right.
And then yeah, the front flower beds had like a little bit of snow in it, and everybody's out taking pictures. They're like, yeah, it actually snowed. And then middle of the night, Sunday night, we lost power, and Sunday morning we came out and we're like, holy cow, which is not a lot. There's like an inch or two of snow out here.
Hmm.
And then there was ice below it. So yeah, it just kind of hit, and it was, you know, get in survival mode ASAP kind of thing.
So did you guys experience, because I saw lots of videos of, different like electricity arcing and all sorts of stuff. Did you guys experience any of that you physically saw yourselves? Or
So we
I mean,
didn't
do you know?
no, we didn't take
Yeah.
on any damage. There wasn't anything super close to us. We
Okay.
lost power for about 37 hours.
Hmm.
And with the power outage, our our water pump station is in the neighborhood, and their
Hmm.
backup generator failed. And so anytime we lost power, we lost water.
Oh.
Um,
Mm.
and so we were without power and water for about 37 hours, from about midnight Sunday or Sunday, Monday. I guess it was
So
midnight Monday
so
through
what
Tuesday
was
afternoon.
the sorry to interrupt you. So what was that process? I mean, when you lost water, or do you still have gas? Are you able to, like, have gas stoves and heat the water to, boil water essentially to be able to still use it, or yeah, bottle water it around? I mean, like, what are you doing in that situation when you lose your water?
Yeah, so both. So when it was, we of course still had gas, which was good. So we were able to use the gas stove, and because of having to be just constantly prepared for a hurricane, because you never really know.
Hmm.
We had
Hmm.
4 or 5 cases of bottled water, some in the pantry, some in the deep freeze in the freezer, some in the refrigerator freezer, because block ice obviously stays
Hmm.
frozen longer than frozen food. So we had, plenty of bottled water to get us through for a few days. What we ultimately did, we woke up Monday morning, and I knew I wasn't going to work, and we had no power, hadn't for a while. And so I cooked bacon and eggs for breakfast. We had a good, decent, I try to keep things a little bit normal for the kids, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
Um, Bacon and eggs for breakfast. And then, we kind of sat around and played board games, built forts, like did all kinds of stuff that you can do without power, until my then 1-year-old, until Bailey walked up to her mom and held her hands up, and she goes, "Hands, cold." I'm like, "Oh,
Mm,
okay, I think it's time to go." And so then we
yeah.
we went and stayed with a buddy of mine and his family, and then until they lost power, at which point we gained power. So then they all came over here. It was very, very stressful, very different time. So
Sure. Well, and
yeah.
it sounds like, I mean, you guys obviously had a very difficult time. There's a lot of people that had, it sounds like, a lot of even more difficult time than what you guys were experiencing. Did you, I mean, other than the friend that you went to go stay with and they lost power, do you have any neighbors directly, or any people you knew in the area that were dealing with this, that were, having an even more tough time or even more difficult time than you guys were dealing yourselves?
Absolutely. I have one friend. He's friends from church, and he had a pipe burst in his house, and then as he was
Mm.
fixing that, he found another spot in his pipes, and at one point he had 3 bursts in his pipes, and he had water coming through the ceiling fans. And so
Oh my
it
gosh.
was one of those things where it's like, I don't even know where to start with this.
Yeah.
Obviously, no electricity until you get the water fixed, but
Yeah.
and then I had friends who, one of the guys that works for me, he called me and he said, I'm out of electricity, and I had a pipe burst, and I woke up to 2 inches of water in my house. And then today there was this big eruption, and it was a gas line that blew about a block down the road, so I don't
Mm.
have gas. And so yeah, there was a lot of just nuts kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of people in Houston who are very much not prepared for cold weather.
Mhm.
Luckily, I've dabbled in about every hobby imaginable, and so I've got camping stuff, I've got cooking stuff, I've got,
Yeah.
we've got cold weather clothes because we used to live in Oklahoma, and I was a big hunter, and so I've got, big thinsulate clothes that we would put on. We put on 2 or 3 different layers, and so we were fortunate, but just the way that we live our life is not by any means prepper, right? But we just are a very sustainable kind of the way that we, always have meat in the freezer. You buy a half a cow and you put it in the freezer, and my wife and I have found that canning vegetables and gardening is kind of something that we enjoy doing together. And so
Mm.
we've got canned vegetables and stuff that are sitting in the pantry. So we weren't worried from a food perspective. But yeah, other people definitely took it a little harder than we did.
Right.
We were
So,
fortunate.
I mean, a little off, but now I got to ask about canning. Well,
Hmm.
is that a hobby that started during coronavirus and like COVID and stuff? Because I know it's one of those things with bread making that a lot of people kind of
Oh,
started to pick up. So, is
yeah.
something you guys were already doing before? Or is it something that kind of developed after another disaster that was happening?
No, that's something that we have been doing for years. I've been doing it since I was a kid. My grandparents live in the mountains in Tennessee, and they've always got this big old garden. And kind of one of the rules when you went to grandma's house was first you pick a row of beans, and then we'll hang out. So you had to go pick
Mm.
a row of green beans, and then we'd just sit in the driveway, and everybody'd be sitting and talking and cracking beans and stringing them, and then we'd go can them, and then we'd move on with our day. So my grandparents, kind of got my mom into it a little bit, but really I probably picked it up in college, just kind of
Mm.
doing it with her. And it was hilarious. My wife, the first time she goes to my grandparents, we had to go pick a row of beans, and she kind of spread out the beans and looked at me through the row, and she goes, these are 50 cents at the grocery store, right? And I was like, no, it's so different. And now she learned she loves it. We'll make jams, and we'll can vegetables, and I'll garden for salsa, and we'll can salsa. Yeah, we've learned that's one of those things we can do together that we
Mhm.
enjoy. So
I love that response by your wife, and that makes me want to, if it hasn't already, I want to put that in a movie. Like that's such a perfect like movie-esque picture there of
uh,
just the like, yeah, these are cheap. We don't have to do this, right? Like
that's exactly what
such a
she
great
did too.
response.
Yeah, yeah.
That's amazing. I love it. Very cool. That's all right. So I mean, we're talking about what you guys have been going through. So how long, as far as like days wise, days, hours? I know you said for a certain amount of hours you had, no power, about 36 hours or so. But really, how long was it until going through this process of initially hitting to kind of that like quote unquote getting back to normal stage? Like, how long did that take, and kind of what was that process you went through?
Yeah, so I would say we had power and water intermittently until about Friday. It was kind of on or off. They were doing rolling blackouts and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And then we probably experienced our version of PTSD for the next week or two of how long is this actually going to stay on? What do we need to
Sure.
do? I think we finally
Mhm.
drained the tubs of water the next week, like the next Monday or Tuesday. But we kept water in the tubs just in case we needed to flush toilets or boil it and drink it or any of that kind of stuff. So,
Mm.
Mhm.
but yeah, definitely on and off. My office reopened on Thursday, but with the role that I play at my company, I was actually in the office on Tuesday driving through the snow. I was there Tuesday and Wednesday and Friday, and so I was kind of driving around all over the place. But once we got power and water back, um, I ended up that actually probably 2 or 3 hours after we got back driving straight to work. Um, so yeah.
I could imagine, as being working in IT, you're probably right there trying to make sure everybody else is getting their connection issues and stuff dealt with too.
Yeah, so all the stuff you typically think of when you think of IT. And so when I say IT, what do you guys think of?
Well, I think of the guy in the office that's usually like walking around just going like, "Ugh," because nobody knows how to use a computer, or they're like, my emails aren't popping up, and then the person like, "Oh, you just need to do this." Oh, that's what I think of when I think of IT. But
Yeah,
that's just because I can understand the frustration that goes into dealing with
true.
like trying to help people and their connection issues and email and whatever it could be. It feels like a catch-all when I hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and
What
that's
about-
kind of that's the role that I play at work is I lead the team that everything from the internet and phones to, being able to have meetings and your computers and all that kind of stuff. And so kind of our job is go in and make sure that when the office does open back up, that it's actually functioning. And so we
Hmm.
were in there, I myself was in there with one other person on Tuesday, and then by Wednesday, was that Tuesday? Yeah. And then by Wednesday, the whole team was in trying to figure out, how do we get this place back up and running? Because at work, I
Mhm.
mean, we burst two pipes at work. We have two main buildings, and we burst two pipes at work, and they had to shut the
Mhm.
electricity off and evacuate everybody, and we had to go back and make sure everything came back up.
Yeah.
So
So
Yeah.
you
Because
you
did
were
you guys
going.
have like backups or like backup generators or anything at
we
work? Like
do.
have,
We have really big
uh,
ones and even unlimited power supplies and that kind of stuff. But whenever you burst a pipe,
mhm.
for safety, they completely shut off everything, all the
Mhm.
electricity, all the backups, all the everything, drained the buildings of all the water, and then they went in, fixed the
Wow.
pipe, recharged the buildings, and then turned the power back on. And it's like, at your computer, you flip the breaker and you flip it back on. It may or may not come back up. And so we have to
Yeah.
figure out, we had to go in and do all that, which was, added stress on my family. I know my wife did not like that. As soon as we got power and water, I was like, peace out. I got to go to work. And I
Yeah.
left.
I was just about to ask you that. I mean, like, because what, as soon as you guys had power and water, or as soon as the business did? Because
As soon
okay,
as we did.
you did. Okay, because I was
Yeah.
picturing the business got power and they're like, "Hey, we need you to come fix this," and you're like, "I don't have power or water at my house," and they're like, "Sorry, gotta come in, business
Yeah.
first." Like that's what I'm picturing. But of course, I'm really glad to hear that it wasn't necessarily set up that way.
Well,
But
I
that's
think I
tough.
got lucky, right? I got lucky there because I did have to call people. There's 30 people on my team, and it was me and
Mm,
one other person that had enough stability that we could take off and go to work.
Mm.
And so the other 28 of them, were just like, I can't, man, I'm soaking up water, or I'm not going to leave
yeah.
my family with no power, or all that. And I
Hmm.
mean, we all understood it. And it was also at the time where the state of Texas was saying, stay off the roads, don't get on the roads.
Mm.
We're like, I'm going to work. So,
Well, that's that. Yeah,
yeah,
that feels like an American, the American way sometimes. They're like, "Hey,
absolutely.
don't do that," and it's like, "Well, you shouldn't. I think I'm okay though, right? I think
Yeah.
I can do this."
Yeah.
So
Like I said,
you know,
I drive a big Jeep with big tires. I can make it. We're good.
yeah, I'll be fine. Yeah, you don't do it though, definitely not. So overall, I mean, so what do you think, like Craig, when we talk about this experience, and obviously the snowstorm and everything that's going on in Houston, and doing that, there's so many different levels of intensity and how it's affected so many families and so many people. I mean, we've talked about there was food shelters open. There was, I mean, there's all sorts of things where people were in really desperate situations. So out of that, having this natural disaster come on in your area and living through it with your family and experience it, however you guys experienced it, what do you think you really learned from this disaster?
Um, so my Bear Grylls quote that I've adopted is improvise, adapt, and overcome. I mean, that's kind of what we ultimately had to do. But ultimately, I think, first off, what I've learned is it really does take a village, right? And you really do need your community. And it bothered me a little bit that week because so many of my, I'll call them friends, people that I know, have just almost severed that relationship with their community over the last year, right? Because we've got
Mm.
this pandemic going on and we're not getting together, and don't come to my house and I'm not coming to your house and I'm not going
Mhm.
out to meet with you anywhere. Um, that it bothered me that I had my community. And, we had intentionally said, all right, here's what we're doing. Are you doing something similar? If so, and we all know what we're doing, we'll get our kids together and we'll play, or we'll have dinner together, or we'll do that kind of stuff. Um, but it really, if I hadn't had that community, I wouldn't have had a place to stay for 36 hours. And then they wouldn't have, I mean, we stayed with them one night, then they came back and stayed with us for two, maybe three nights.
Mhm.
And others in our little circle of families kind of jumped in with each other. So like, to me, like, number one is there's a reason we have these friendships and community, and being able to, I'll call it, leverage them, right, whenever you need, and reach out to those people was
Hmm.
huge. It was huge for us. Um, I mean, the other thing that really, really stuck out to me was the way my kids handled it or didn't handle it. And it was, we've been through change. My kids even have been through change. Since my 6-year-old was born, we've lived in 3 different houses in 2 different states.
Mhm.
And, we've gained new family members like Stephen and his
Hmm.
family. My dad died right before Sarah's mom died. And
Mhm.
so through all that, we've gained family members. Our whole family dynamic has changed since my kids have been around. But it even still, something as simple as a snowstorm and the fact that you don't have power is such a dramatic change. And it was to my
Hmm.
kids. Boredom sets in, they can't, we're not going to let them sit there and play their tablets, because what if you run the battery down and we need those
Mhm.
things? You can't watch TV, you can't, what do you do? And then boredom sets in and mental fatigue sets in, and everything becomes unpredictable, attitudes and everything else. But one thing that I realized middle of the first day, I was just so frustrated with them, because it was one of those things where it's like, it's not that hard. Like, grow up. Like, it's not
Hmm.
hard. And then, like, in the back of my head before, my instinct was, I need to pull that kid aside, holler at him a little bit, let him know how he should be acting. I ended up pulling him aside and we just sat and talked. And I said, dude,
Mhm.
you got to be able to talk to me. Like, this is hard. And this is hard for me. And I want you to know, as a 6-year-old, and even my 5-year-old had to have the same conversation of, I want you to know, like, this is hard for us too. We as parents, we're tired. We really want things to go back to normal. And just being able to sit down and have that conversation with my kids to where they could say, yeah, I don't like this. It's like, no, I don't either. It's not
Hmm.
what we consider normal. So that was interesting to me, the way that my kids handled it,
Mhm.
between the actual fatigue and the mental fatigue and having to sleep in the cold and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, and, you know what? That's interesting too that you bring up that point because I think we've all been there as dads. I don't think it necessarily takes a natural disaster to have that moment of like, "Hey, man, suck it up, like
yeah,
grow up a little bit." I don't know about you, Steven. I know Craig. You just said you did. I definitely have had those moments where I just want to be like, "Hey, grow up," and then
Hmm.
immediately my brain is going, "You don't want them to grow up. No,
no,
slow down, stop it, be a
Hmm.
kid," and you have to remind yourself. And for as a father, when you're in that situation, it's super easy for any of us to be stressed and just say, "Hey, uh, look, I've got my own problems to deal with. You guys figure it out." Right? That's incredibly easy to do from our perspective as fathers. What's really tough is making that choice to say, "Hey, let's talk about this. Let's connect. Let's we're in that idea of we're in this together that we hear so
Hmm.
much, especially in this time of COVID and everything. Really, really embracing that and bringing that together in your family and saying, look, we really are in this together, and we are here for each other, no matter how big or small you are. Like, this is going to be a memory that will, most likely last in your life and affect your life. So how can we make this not just the most positive thing, but how can we move forward as a family, and how can we, bring this as a coming together moment instead of a separating moment? Because I know, as much as that is difficult to experience, it's much easier to fall into that. Like, you guys are kids, like, you don't get it. We're adults,
Yeah.
we're dealing with this, and that's so much easier to go there than it is to make the choice to say, I'm going to stick in this and I'm going to put in the effort to make sure you're heard and make sure you feel not just safe, but also like, if you have concerns, what are they? Voice them to me. Because you're right. The your daughter coming to you saying hands cold, like, I can picture that. That breaks my heart. And I've been there. I'll watch my kids on the swing and then the baby's swinging and I'm just like, his hands have got to be cold. And you go through that, like, that's just outside playing. That's not experiencing what you guys were experiencing, and knowing how difficult that could be. So I give you some praise. That takes a lot to make that choice to be an active father in that situation instead of letting your stress take you over. That's
Hmm.
that's a big step. So
Well,
I
thank you,
commend you. Yeah.
thank you.
Um, yeah, and then Steven, I know we've talked about this, right? This is Craig. You're sharing your experience, and Steven, we've talked about this. I mean, we live in California, so
Hmm.
we have different kind of natural disasters. I mean, we have this kind of like deserty climate a lot of times. So a lot of times we'll go through different heat. Like, for us,
Hmm.
we'll go through like these heat waves, right? And the heat
Hmm.
waves will be depending on where you are in LA. The heat waves will sometimes we'll have rolling blackouts, so we'll just not
Hmm.
have power for a few days. Like, Where we particularly live, we live with an older power grid. So when the windstorms come, which sounds weird to say, because we're not necessarily having tornadoes, but sometimes we'll just have big gusts and it'll knock out our power. And sometimes for a couple of days, we won't have power. So that's really what we wanted to talk about today is Craig, your experience, but also we want to talk about natural disasters and what we can do as fathers to prepare. It's awesome that you guys had all your canned food and water, that you were prepared for hurricanes, and then it just happened to be you had this other type of natural disaster, right? So us in California, a lot of times we're prepared for earthquakes, and then if something else happens, like a tsunami or whatever else, like we may not be prepared for that. So Stephen, I know you've been working on a list today. We want to talk about some ways we can prepare to prepare our families, prepare ourselves as men, as fathers, to be the protectors and the guiders, right, of our family when those things happen.
Yeah, and it's not even like, I mean, you can look up online and find all the, there's a lot of preppers out there that have all the lists and all the checklists and everything, and do a great job of like making sure you have this much, they do all the calculations. You have this many humans living in your home. You should have this much water and this much food. I think for these purposes, it's really going down to a few things that I think are helpful when you're outside, obviously, of these natural disasters or things that really uproot your family, and change it up. I mean, it's one thing to be like, hey, we're not going over to those people's houses, or, we're changing our plans a little bit. It's another thing to, for the parents in the home and the kids in the family unit to be like, this is something that's completely out of our control that we're just adjusting to, and we're figuring it out. A lot like the pandemic, right? Where it's just like, hey, I don't have any control over like whether this COVID stuff's coming or what, things are happening statewide, citywide, all that kind of stuff. But I think one of the things is talk to your family ahead of time. And again, this is really age specific. So depending on how old your kids are, obviously like with, you guys have even younger kids than I do. There's certain discussions that, Bailey is going to go right over her head, and there's no reason to go through her, all the different checklists and all where to meet and all those kinds of things, and do all that. But I think there is a little bit of a discussion that's helpful. I mean, even when we went through our adoption process, we had to have on the fridge, the local fire department phone number, the local, where these places are, and just some basic emergency information that can be helpful in various types of emergencies, right? And so it's like, because a lot of times your brain can go, safety first, grab the kids, make yourself safe, all those kinds of things. But it's helpful to have just, a few items or a few places that you can call or know what numbers they are so that you can make that phone call, I think. And then when you're talking with your family, it's really about just, hey, when these things happen, here's what we're going to do. And part of that, again, is age specific. But I think like even with my kids that range from now 7 to 10, it's just basic information to let them know, not to scare them, but just to let them know, hey, mom and dad have a plan. Hey, if something happens, here's what you're going to do. It's not very much different than like if you went to a park and you said, hey, if, now we all have 3 or more kids. So it's like, I know when I go to a park, it's like, hey, if one of you gets hurt, I need one of you to stay and the other one comes and finds me, it's like that basic kind of information. And we actually, like, this is a little bit of a side tangent, but we actually did that with our kids. And this is probably going to bite me in the butt later on when my kids actually ever do listen to this podcast. But we have 3 kids and we had them riding bikes in our backyard for a little while. And we do have a pool without a fence. And so we have a little bit older kids. So we felt safe. It has to be all 3 of you. You all have to be out there at the same time. And we actually did have one of them fall into the pool with their bike. Like they took a wrong turn. I don't know what happened. We actually have footage from our Nest camera of it, but like just took a wrong turn. Thankfully he was okay, but like he took a wrong turn, boom, right into the pool. And when we said that happens, like one of them goes and checks on them. The other one comes and finds mom and dad, because we always leave our big sliding door window open or whatever, so we can see them. And it like worked like a charm. I mean, it was like, they were like, you know, it was like army, like it was just very like one of them ran in and was like, this is what happened. They fell in the pool and I'm running to go get, you know, new underwear. And like, and basically it was just like boom, boom, boom. And then the other, you know, and then we ran out there and the other one had pulled him out of the water and it was like, everything's fine. And I was like, holy crap, it worked. Like this little like plan that we had. And then obviously after that, we were like, okay, no more bikes. We can't do this. This is not cool. But that kind of little bit is what we're talking about here when you're talking to your family. Hey, you know, if this happens, come find mom and dad, or just, you know, so you're opening that dialogue that, hey, these things happen and we're going to work through that, is kind of the first point I wanted to make. And the second one was, you know, this is where, Craig, you kind of noted that you had some things in place. Maybe they weren't specific to a snowstorm, but hey, like, here's some, you know, we're going to have some water, some of the basic checklist items that you can have in your garage, or even if you're in an apartment, you can put them in a closet. I know, again, we did a lot of this with our adoption stuff, is figuring out, hey, you know, like we had to have a first aid kit that we had stocked, you know, that actually like was not expired, you know, and it's just basic stuff like that that can really help in an emergency, is to have those things, and those things work on the go as well. So we made sure that we had one of those in the car as well. So and you know, it's little things like making sure that you're prepared, I think really helps with that. And again, the checklist stuff, you can go down and you can get super prepared and really, you know, like if a meteor is going to hit, you can go like super deep into that if you want to. But I think the main point that I wanted to kind of make was, one, it's just kind of that communication. And then second, it's really like going into some of that checklist and finding what works for your family and what works for, you know, your guys' lifestyle, and making sure that you are somewhat prepared for that.
Right. First off, I have a suggestion for your backyard. Why don't you guys put a little ramp, right? The ramp so they can ride their bikes, ramp off and land in the water on purpose.
Hot rod.
You know,
Do like hot
make
rod.
sure. Yeah. Make
thing
sure. I
floats.
mean, you know, make sure there's adult supervision when you do that. But I mean, that sounds fun. Right. And then at least if they fall in, they're like, oh yeah, okay, I'm a little better prepared. That I'm just saying, just think about it. Just think about it.
Well, as
Grant,
a dad,
you're
I
my
walked
kinda
out.
dad.
And I walked out, and my first thing was, okay, all the kids are okay. And then I looked down, and I'm like, oh, it's the deep end. There's a bike on the deep end, and this water
Right.
is like 50 degrees. I'm not going down there. And then I thought, like, no, I can't put my kid in there. That's terrible. And then I was like, well, how am I going to get this bike out? Because it's 9 feet deep, or 9 or 10 feet deep. Like, it's like a legit deep end. And I was like, okay. And so I ended up taking the hammock. We have one of those like standalone hammocks where it's, you know, it's got the bar and everything, and then you just hook on the hammock part. So I was like, there's a hook. And that seems long enough, because I was like, the pool thing's not going to pull it out. I need some kind of like hook, you know, like this is an actual bike. And so then it's like a few minutes later, it's me lowering this entire hammock down into the deep end. And I'm like, there's like these little benches on the side. And so I'm like knee deep in this water, and it's super cold. And I'm just like lowering this thing down in. And then I'm like pulling, like, I felt like such a manly dad. I was like just pulling this bike up out of the water, like, don't worry, kids, I got this, you know? And so we ended up getting the bike out, but then quickly mom was like, no, we're not doing this anymore. Not even gonna entertain the bike idea anymore in the backyard.
It
I
feels
like
like
the
you're
MacGyver skills.
I would say it feels like you're walking the fine line of too much work for yourself, and then also like really like ingenuity, like dad ingenuity. You know, you're like, it's very close to one.
Well, it's
and the
that kind
same
of
there, but-
laziness where I was like, if the water was warm, I would just dive down and pull it up. But I was like, that's not happening.
Yeah, that's a little cold for me. No, I get that. No, that's
To
so.
your point though, Grant. You know, when my kids finally started riding bikes without training wheels, I told them bikes are worthless if you don't have some sketchy wooden ramp. And so I did end up putting it's like a piece of plywood on a 4x4 post, and I've had to screw it back together a couple times.
I know you said
gotta
hot
have a
rod.
wooden ramp.
Exactly. You said hot rod. I always think of Napoleon Dynamite when there was like the tiny little ramp was like, boom, Whoa. Like that to me, that's what I think of. But yes. But all joking aside, I love the first point, right? We're talking about talking to your family, right? And Stephen addressed talking to your kids directly. I want to just reiterate too, make sure whether you're, single dad, divorced dad, or whether you're in a relationship, make sure you have some kind of accountability partner, right? So if it's your wife or your partner, whatever it could be, make sure that you guys are on the same page. So yes, it's about talking to your kids too, but also make sure that the plan is not just, I think we have a plan. No, it's we got to just talk about like if this happens, so we're on the same page, okay? And then same thing, if you happen to be a single father or in this situation, make sure you have some kind of family member or something that maybe you can say like, hey, here is our situation. If this happens, if they live close enough, whether it's a neighbor or a family member or something where you can say like, if this happens, I want to be on the same page with you. So, we can kind of be there. Now that may be tough, but that just raises that level of accountability in a situation where, something troubling could be happening. For us, for our particular family, I know my wife and I had to be on the same page, and we hadn't experienced anything much like this. We had dealt with what's the winter, and let's see, I guess summer into fall last year in 2020. I was working on WandaVision, so I was out of the house quite a bit. And also when I'm working on a production, I am gone all the time. It's very, very rarely do I get to come home and do anything. And in the middle of all this, not only is there coronavirus stuff that we're dealing with, but then there are fires. And so we had fires that we could see the smoke behind our house. You open the door, it smells like there's a barbecue going on. And it was creeping closer and closer to the point where we weren't in the evacuation zone, but we were in the get ready to be evacuated zone. So it was like the zone outside of the zone. And so basically we had our van packed, and we had our van pulled up on our front yard facing out so we could get ready to get in the van and go at a moment's notice. The other thing we did is, you're talking about being prepared and having that food and water. This particular situation, we had bags packed, right? And so that situation is that you're packing bags, you get your kids involved. That's a great way of having them talk about like, this is what we're doing. In that particular situation, right, we could have them pack their own bags with a few days worth of clothes because we don't know where we're going, but if we need to get off this mountain, we're going to go right away, right? But the other part of that, like I said, talking to your partner and making sure that you're on the same page is that there were plenty of times that I had to be at work and I had to get up and go to work in the morning knowing that, okay, if this happens today, let's like I'll be in Burbank, you'll be here. Okay. All right. So if that's the case, then you get out of there as fast as you can, just grab these bags, go, and then we'll find where we're going to meet up at. Right. But you have that idea of like, keep me informed, and you just want to be on that same page with your partner just as much as you are informing your kids. So clearly, if I haven't reiterated that over and over again, that is something that is super, super important, right? Communication during a disaster is key.
Well, and on that note, at least for us in this thing was in this winter storm, was playing on each other's strengths, right? Like my wife does not expect that I'm the one that's going to stay at home with all three kids while she goes out and buys more water. Like because she wins the best wife award regardless of what you guys say, right? She's got the patience of a saint, and she's very slow to anger. She can endure through all that stuff, and I'm the opposite. Like a 3-day weekend, and she looks at me and she's like, "Are you ready to get back to work?" Yeah, probably, right? I don't have that pay. I have the let's go do something and get it done kind of mentality of worker bee. I'm also I'm kind of adaptable. I'm like, I call myself a 60-year-old man in a 32-year-old's body. I'm really old school about some stuff. And so just, being able to play on my strengths of I will do what it takes to make this happen, and her strengths of I will support you in that, and I will be the one that, helps get our kids kind of maintained through this whole thing while we're at a friend's house and I have to come back and let the dog out, or I have to go to work or whatever. So, just being able to play on those strengths is huge. And one thing I'll mention it here is my wife kind of reminded me. So I'm in IT and I do all this technology stuff, and she reminded me because our neighborhood has terrible cell signal, and so if you're not doing calls over Wi-Fi, you're pretty much stuck. And so there were a lot of times there where we couldn't get stuff in or out communication wise. But she reminded me, she's like, hey, you can call them. I was like, oh, our phones have a phone capability on them. I guess I can call
Right.
somebody, and so just
Yeah.
being able to stay kind of grounded and
Hmm.
whenever I call it, don't catch on fire when there's a fire. You got to walk into a fire and not catch on fire. In this case, it was kind of like walk into a snowstorm and don't freeze, right?
Hmm.
It's kind of the same thing, and just
Yeah.
being able to play on each other's strengths was pretty huge.
That's I love the way you put that, and that's a great way of also talking about using your strengths. I think that is something now, Stephen. You've got older kids, so
Hmm.
it may be more applicable for you and any of those fathers out there that have older kids, especially teenage kids, right? As opposed to maybe Craig and I, we've got some youngers. But I do think there is a spot for, like, let's say you have your 6-year-old or your 5-year-old. If you know their strengths and you give them a role, like we can talk about that. Hey,
Hmm.
when this happens, you're going to be in charge of the water, right? And you're going to be the one that's going to be
Hmm.
passing out the water. That's going to add that aspect of, like, we're in this together feeling, where they have
Yeah.
a job, they have a role to play, instead of like, I'm just going to sit here and wait this out. Now there are a number of different emergency situations that could happen. So I think it's I want to say the possibilities are endless, but also, like, this may not apply to every single emergency, but this is a general rule of kind of like, if we can talk, if we communicate, if we do these things with our kids, this is going to help them in the long run. Stephen, for you, yeah, same thing. I mean, what kind of roles could you give your kids? I mean, you don't have to expressly break down each one, but think about it. Like,
Yeah.
if you had, their personalities, like, what kind of
Hmm.
roles could you give? Do you have a nurturer, or maybe the creative one, or the entertainer? Like, do you have those kind of roles that you could pass out to your kids in a situation like this, and maybe combat boredom, or maybe also have them feel
Hmm.
like they're engaged in helping the family?
Yeah, definitely. And I think this goes back to a couple times that we've talked recently on this podcast, which is really just being that engaged dad and really understanding your family unit and how it works. And I think, Craig, you mentioned that with Valian, where it's like, hey, I know what she does and I know what she brings to the table. And with your kids, I think it can be very similar. With my daughter, she's able to handle a lot and she can manage things. So if it's like, hey, I need you to make sure that no one goes outside, everyone stays, those kinds of things, where if there's other kids around or animals, hey, we need to make sure that these animals stay in this room, whatever that might be, she's able to manage that a little bit more. She's the typical firstborn, where she loves that, like, give me some responsibility. My middle kid is, don't give me any responsibility. He's not the follow through kid, but he is the kid that emotionally, he's one of the most emotionally intelligent kids I've seen, where he can really help with the mood of the house. He is
Mm.
that, like, mood swing of the house. So it's like, hey, can you make sure and help me, like, can you turn some fun music on, or hey, is there something that we can do to help in that way? And he will know, okay, my mom likes this and my dad likes this and my siblings like this. Or even like, hey, is there a board game that we can play? He'll be like, oh yeah, I remember so and so, you said yesterday they want to play this game. So he's very emotionally intelligent. And then my youngest is very diligent. So it's like, hey, he's my like engineer type, where it's like, we build Lego sets together and we don't quit until that entire Lego set is done. Like, my middle son is like, this is fun for 5 minutes, and then he dips out. But like, me and my youngest are like, no, we are building the entire X-Wing, today, we will finish this. And so it's learning about you, it's understanding your own family and your own different strengths. And I think that's a great point during these things, even during this pandemic. Like, it's been important to keep our kids engaged, and hey, they don't understand what's happening in the outside world, and they only know what mom and dad are telling them, or whoever the parent is, and or authority figure. And so it's important, I think, Craig, like what you mentioned this a little bit, where it's like, hey, it's okay to kind of come down from that and talk with your kids and really communicate, like, hey, this is scary, I understand this, but still, like, hey, I'm here and I'm taking care of these things, and don't worry, I'm not leaving. Or even that scary time where it's like, I am going to work. I remember, like, my first, job during the pandemic, where it's like, okay, like, or even for us, like, during the pandemic when it was hitting, it was like, oh, we got to move my entire family back from Michigan to LA. How is this going to do? What do we do? So I think it's important to have those communications and have those things, and you can give those little jobs. So like whenever, like during the pandemic, when we were driving back, for instance, it was like, the big thing was like, don't touch the gas pumps. And there was like, we didn't know if it lived on surfaces at that point, and there was all this stuff. And so trying to take 3 little kids to a random gas station restroom was like a lot to not touch any surfaces. So I was like, this is like MacGyver stuff. I don't know how to do this. So like, but it's like giving my daughter like, hey, make sure nobody touches anything. But if they do, make sure here's some hand sanitizer. So she like felt like I'm helping, I'm making sure that this is done, and so that was super helpful. And I think it can be really helpful in these like natural disasters that are a lot faster. You don't have a month or two to kind of plan, or, hey, this is a heads up. Or like Craig, you said, and I think Grant, you mentioned, I can't tell you how many like tornadoes we're going to hit that just never came, and so it's like one of those things that you just never know when it's going to happen. And it usually always happens at the worst time, or like you have some big meeting or thing that's planned or event or something, and then it gets canceled. And so I think the big thing is that communication. And so I'm so glad that we had you on, Craig, and talk about one of these things that just happened, because then it can be like, it's that firsthand, because it's always that potential thing that could happen. But to really talk about, hey, this is what happened, and who knew that a snowstorm would hit Texas? Like, it's one thing for like an earthquake to happen in California or a fire, but like one that you're like, I'm in Texas, like I'm in a tropical climate, and snow shut us down for a week. Like, I don't even understand what's happening. And so it's good to know, like, also those little bit of when you made it through, now that you guys have made that process through, you start to refine it a little bit, and you start to build that muscle as a family unit to be like, hey, we made it through this part. Here's what we've done. Here's what we can do better. So I'm so glad that we had you on, and I'm glad that we were able to make this happen.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to come on and chat about it. It was definitely one of those things where we learned things from it. My kids being 6 and 5, they're not quite to that point where they're the nurturer or they're the go-getter or any of that, but they do have those personality traits, right? Like my 6-year-old, you give him a job and he'll get it done. And so we told him, we're pulling out board games, we're pulling out card games, we're building forts, we're doing all these things that you guys don't typically do. We have to make sure this house doesn't just fall apart, right? Like, so if you see, somebody's shoes in the middle of the floor, like, help us get those in the shoe closet. Or, if we've left a fort out and it's time to clean up, like, you got to help me clean. You're the older brother. You got to help me keep this house together. And then when I did have to go to work, I sat them both down kind of on a chair and I said, listen, I have to leave. You know that this has been crazy. Your job is to protect Mom and Bailey now. Like, I kind of just sat them down and put that in their head. I'm like, that's your job. If Mom needs anything, it's you, right? She can't come to me and ask. So you guys have to help, because Bailey's 1 year old at the time, right? She just turned 2 like 2 weeks ago. She's 1 year old, and you guys, like, you're the man of the house because I have to leave. And then they both kind of puff their chest out like, yeah, I am the man. Yes, okay, yes you are. You take care of Mom, which really was my way of saying, listen to your mother. Don't make this harder on her.
Yeah. We call that little helpers in my house, but it gets it's however you want to translate it. That's really what we're saying. Yeah, I got you.
For sure. I will say that the other thing that I accidentally learned, and it's a little less serious and heavy than what we've been talking about, but is the Nintendo Switch is the perfect gaming system for a natural disaster. Like, if we would sit here and we'd play it, and then the power would blip out, and then it would switch to just, it's tablet mode or it's handheld mode. So we'd just kind of like set that against a book or something. And we'd keep playing, the 3 or 4 of us together. And then the power would kick on, and we'd set it back down on the thing. And it'd come back up on the TV. And late at night, I'd be sitting around bored, and so I'd just take it and lay in bed and set it and just play Nintendo Switch. It was perfect.
I think each one of us have that in the house, right? Steven, you've got one too, right? Yeah, because we've got one, and it's not just good for natural disasters. It's good, and what I love about the Switch is that if you want to watch a game or something, right? And we're not talking natural disaster at this point, but if you want to watch a game, and that's the TV, right, in the main living room that's connected to the Switch, you can pop it off and they can sit on the couch and play with it. Or have you done the tabletop? The table. I mean, this isn't a Nintendo Switch commercial. I'm so sorry, but I mean, you can set up and they can sit at the dining room table and play against each other. I'm just like, this is great. So anyway, yes, I'm with you. That's a good lesson learned, Craig. I like that.
Yes,
that's good stuff. Well, I want to say, Craig, I appreciate you coming on today and talking about your experience. I know, we've had some heavy conversation. I know that it's a really difficult situation that you've been in and you've been through with your family. And again, not to diminish it from anyone else, because there's a lot of people also that really struggled. It was a very difficult situation. Natural disasters are never easy. They are difficult wherever they can be. And us as fathers, our job through that role, our job through those things are to be, the ship that comes through the storm. Like, we are the ones that are, when our kids are scared, they're looking to us, okay, to comfort them, to guide them. And so that's really what this comes down to is us as fathers to prepare ourselves, to prepare our family, to protect our families. We don't have to jump off the deep end and go fully, prep. But I will say, having those things in practice, right? Practicing communication, having some things that are prepared, and having an idea to say, like, if I'm not fully prepared, what's the next step? And having those thoughts and discussions, those are what are really, really important in this regard. So, because not all of us have space to have tons and tons of stuff stored away, right? So it's to have that game plan set for your family, to have that communication with your partner, that is so vital. So Craig, again, thank you so much for coming on today. Is there anything else you want to add before we hop out of here?
No, not really. I mean, it's been a blast. I've loved sitting down chatting with you guys, and if another winter storm comes through, I'm happy to come back on again.
No, I don't want you to be that, like, our correspondent in Houston.
Yeah. I tell you what, Craig, if the one thing I didn't hear you say is that what you learned was that if the weather person says the snow is coming, that you went, okay, I'll take it serious this time. All right. No, I'm glad you admitted it. No, okay.
I am shaking my head no right now. I still won't believe them when hurricane season comes around. They're like, there's 10 hurricanes going to hit Houston, and we don't get any.
At least you're honest. That's good.
Poor Louisiana, they get all of our hurricanes. But
I know,
that is true.
It's tough.
Yeah.
Well, you guys, thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode. Craig, thank you again. Steven, thank you as always. If you want to hear more It's a Dad Thing podcast, remember to subscribe, like, all the things, so we can improve our scores or whatever it is, so we can get more listeners out there. If you know a dad that needs some help or that wants to just be a better dad, please feel free to share our podcast. Again, I've said it before, even if they don't want to hear it, share it. Feel free. We're trying to grow this. We're trying to have a show that is for dads, made by dads, that are trying to help all of us improve, to be better fathers, better husbands, better partners, everything you can imagine. So please like, subscribe, rate us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you hear your podcast, Spotify, Amazon, wherever. And again, thank you so much for joining us on another episode of It's a Dad Thing podcast. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.